I took the transfer to rural Ohio because I needed quiet, or at least that's what I told myself. After 12 years on a city force where sirens never stopped screaming and faces blurred into threats, I wanted cornfields, two-lane roads, and calls that ended with paperwork instead of apologies. The town was small enough that the welcome sign still listed the population from a decade ago. The station smelled like old coffee and floor polish, and the chief shook my hand like he'd been waiting for it to mean something. He didn't smile. He slid a manila envelope across the desk and told me to read it before my first night patrol. I assumed it was policy updates, maybe a map. It was 10 rules written in neat block letters like someone feared cursive might invite interpretation. Rule 1 was simple. Never drive Old Mill Road after sunset. Rule 2 warned me not to respond to calls that mentioned a crying child in the woods. Rule 3 said if the radio went silent, I should keep driving until it returned, even if dispatch used my name. I felt my mouth curl into a grin that tasted like disbelief. The chief watched me carefully, as if waiting for a tell. I asked if this was a joke, a hazing ritual for transfers. He said no. And for the first time, his voice carried weight, like a stone dropped into deep water. He told me to sign the last page. I did, because I needed the job and because men like me mistake signatures for shields. My first night was quiet in the way that feels staged. Crickets chirped in steady loops, and my headlights carved pale tunnels through fog that hugged the ditches. I drove the perimeter roads, counted mailboxes, memorized names on rusted signs. The radio hummed with static and distant voices, nothing urgent. When I reached the turn for Old Mill Road, the GPS chirped cheerfully, recommending a shortcut. I laughed and drove past, pretending the rules were folklore designed to keep rookies alert. 10 minutes later, dispatch called my name. The radio went dead mid-syllable, the sound collapsing into a vacuum that pressed against my ears. I remembered Rule 3, and kept driving. Hands locked on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead. Behind me, in the rear view, headlights bloomed and vanished like breath on glass. The silence lasted exactly 6 miles. When the radio crackled back to life, dispatch sounded confused, then relieved. They said they'd lost me for a while. I didn't tell them about the headlights. I didn't tell them about the shape that crossed the road ahead. Tall and jointless, moving like it had learned walking from diagrams. I finished my shift with a headache and the sense that the envelope had gotten heavier in my pocket. The next night, a call came in just before midnight. A woman reported hearing a child crying near the tree line by her farm. She said it sounded hurt, I slowed, my thumb hovering over the radio. Rule 2 echoed in my head, absurd and cruel. I asked for clarification, my voice too steady. Dispatch repeated the address and asked why I wasn't responding. I pictured my sister at 8, knees scabbed, crying when she fell. I turned toward the farm and cut my lights as I approached. The crying stopped the moment I stepped out of the cruiser. The woods breathed. I backed away slowly and left without announcing myself. In the mirror, something waved with a hand too many fingers wide. By the end of the week, the rules had earned my respect the way scars earn attention. Rule 4 told me never to enter the old grain silo alone. Rule 5 said if I saw a deer standing on its hind legs, I should close my eyes and count to 50. Rule 6 instructed me to ignore knocks on the station door between 2 and 3 a.m., no matter how polite. I learned the station had no cameras facing the parking lot, and I stopped wondering why. The chief never asked questions, but he listened when I spoke, and that felt like permission. On the 7th night, a storm rolled in fast, flattening the sky into a lid. The radio choked on static, and a voice I didn't recognize asked me to confirm my location. My name followed, spoken softly, wrong. Rule 7 said never answer questions asked in a familiar voice if you were alone. I killed the radio and drove until the rain became needles. When I passed the silo, lightning split the sky and illuminated shapes moving inside, circling like a slow argument. I didn't stop. By the time dawn crept up, I understood the town wasn't hiding monsters. It was maintaining them, the way you maintain levees or graves. The rules weren't about control. They were about survival. And survival demanded a particular kind of obedience. I went home, slept, and dreamed of roads that rearranged themselves when no one was looking. When I woke, the envelope sat on my table, thicker now, as if it had been fed. I knew there were rules I hadn't read yet, and that eventually one of them would be about me. That afternoon, the chief called and asked me to come in early. He said there was something I should understand before the next patrol. Something transfers never grasp until it's too late. When I arrived, the station felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in. He handed me a fresh page, Rules 8 through 10, ink still damp. Rule 8 warned that some calls are tests, not requests. Rule 9 explained that leaving is possible, but only once, and never at night. Rule 10 was blank. The chief told me everyone fills it in eventually. And when they do, they stop asking why the town endures. I nodded, folded the page, and realized understanding would cost more than obedience ever demanded from me. It seems like I can't do more advanced data analysis right now. Please try again later. I tried to pretend the blank 10th rule was a joke, a psychological trick meant to keep deputies cautious. That lie lasted until my next shift. The storm had scrubbed the air clean, leaving the night sharp and cold. I rolled past fields stitched with fence lines, barns crouched like animals, and houses with one light on, always one, as if the town rationed wakefulness. Dispatch was calm, efficient. Calls came in for loose cattle, a broken mailbox, a noise complaint that turned out to be a wind chime arguing with the porch. Normal things. The rules stayed folded in my pocket, heavy as a badge. At 2:11 a.m., someone knocked on the station door. It was a polite knock, measured, patient. Rule 6 flared in my mind. I sat at the desk, hands flat, breathing slow. The knock came again, closer this time, as if the door had learned to lean forward. A voice thanked me for my service and asked if I had a moment. It sounded like my father, who died 5 years ago and never thanked me for anything. I didn't move. The handle rattled once, gently, then stopped. When the silence returned, it felt earned. The radio crackled with a call about headlights circling the grain silo. Rule 4. I parked at a distance and watched the structure loom, its metal skin whispering as the wind combed it. Lights moved inside, tracing arcs that didn't align with the catwalks I remembered from daylight. I took notes instead of steps. After 20 minutes, the lights vanished. Dispatch thanked me for checking in. I didn't correct them. Later, a deer stood in the road, balanced upright like a person testing new shoes. Its eyes reflected my headlights with a wet intelligence that made my stomach turn. I closed my eyes and counted to 50, careful not to rush the numbers. When I opened them, the road was empty, but hoofprints led away on 2 legs. I drove on, pulse steady, convinced that obedience was the only language the town understood. Near dawn, a call came through, tagged urgent. A car had gone off Old Mill Road. I felt my jaw tighten. Rule 1 was explicit, but Rule 8 said some calls were tests. I asked for details. Dispatch said the caller was already gone. No injuries reported. I drove to the intersection and stopped short of the turn, headlights painting the warning sign. The road beyond dipped into darkness like a held breath. I radioed that I couldn't proceed and waited. The test passed quietly, like most things that matter. Days blurred. I learned which houses brewed coffee at odd hours, which dogs barked at shadows, which faces watched me too closely. The chief spoke little. When he did, it was to remind me to rest. He never mentioned the blank rule. The town's rhythm seeped into me, a metronome ticking just under thought. I found myself scanning for rules where none were written, anticipating edges. Then the radio went silent again. But this time, I was parked. Rule 3 said keep driving. I hesitated, the cruiser idling. My name came through the dead channel, whispered. I put the car in gear and rolled forward. The station receded in the mirror, its windows dark. Headlights appeared behind me, closer than before. I drove until the radio returned and the headlights peeled away like a thought abandoned. The next afternoon, I found a notebook in my locker that wasn't mine. Inside were dates and initials, entries clipped and precise. Deputies before me, following the rules, filling margins with observations. The last page held a sentence underlined twice. The town remembers what you owe it. I shut the notebook and felt the weight of a debt I hadn't agreed to. That night, a child laughed in the woods. Not cried. Laughed. Delighted. Inviting. Rule 2 didn't cover laughter. I stopped anyway, engine running, lights off. The laughter moved closer, then farther, as if testing distance. I stayed put until it faded. When I returned to the station, the chief was waiting. He asked if I was ready to write my rule. I told him not yet. He nodded, disappointed, and said readiness was a courtesy the town rarely extended. Driving home, I noticed the roads hadn't rearranged themselves. They stayed where I left them. It felt like a warning. I started sleeping with the radio on, volume low, like a charm against bad dreams. It didn't help. I dreamed of doors that knocked back, of voices that learned my cadence and practiced it until they sounded right. I woke tired, drank coffee that tasted burnt no matter how I brewed it, and drove back to the station before the sun finished climbing. The chief watched me more closely now, not with suspicion, but with something like anticipation. Rule 8 proved itself 3 nights later. Dispatch sent me to a farmhouse on the edge of town for a welfare check. Elderly resident, no answer at the door, lights on inside. The address sat just shy of Old Mill Road. I parked, listened, smelled rain. Inside the house, a television murmured to an empty room. The air was wrong, cold and sweet. I didn't cross the threshold. Instead, I called for backup that never came and logged the visit as incomplete. On my way out, the TV volume rose. just enough to hear my name spoken in a game show cadence, cheerful and wrong. I left without looking back. The notebook in my locker grew thicker, pages filling themselves with observations I didn't remember writing. Dates matched my shifts. Initials were mine. I tried to throw it away once. It was back the next day, neat as ever. The underlined sentence stayed at the end, daring me to argue. I began adding notes intentionally, careful and clinical, like a man charting symptoms he refuses to name. One night, a call came in from the school. Motion sensors triggered. I arrived to find the doors unlocked and the hallways lit. Children's art lined the walls, suns with too many rays, stick figures holding hands. In the gym, the basketballs rolled in slow circles, nudged by something unseen. Rule 5 whispered from memory. I closed my eyes and counted to 50. When I opened them, the balls were still and the lights hummed like insects. I locked up and left a note for the morning custodian that said nothing of value. The chief finally spoke about the blank rule after a deputy from the next county went missing. He said outsiders come with expectations, and expectations attract attention. He said the town was old and patience is a kind of hunger. When I asked why we kept feeding it, he looked tired in a way that felt permanent. He said because it eats worse when starved. I considered leaving. Rule 9 allowed it once in daylight. I packed a bag and set it by the door. In the morning, the roads looked ordinary, forgiving even. I drove to the edge of town and stopped. The sign behind me faded and honest. I thought about the notebook, the rules, the way the town breathed. I turned around. The bag stayed in the trunk, accusing. The first time I broke a rule, it was small. I answered a question, asked in a familiar voice while I wasn't alone. Dispatch asked me to confirm a plate number. My partner was in the passenger seat, new, eager. I answered. The silence afterward was thick. My partner asked why the air felt heavier. I told him allergies. That night, his name appeared in the notebook, circled. After that, the town pressed closer. Lights lingered at intersections. Shadows learned corners. The crying returned, threaded with laughter, testing me. I followed the rules harder, stricter, like a penitent counting beads. It wasn't enough. The chief aged 10 years in a week. He started avoiding mirrors. The call that changed everything came just before dawn. Multiple reports, voices overlapping. A car stalled on Old Mill Road. A family inside. Children. Rule 1 screamed, Rule 8 whispered. I drove to the intersection and stopped. The road beyond was brighter than it should have been, illuminated by something that wasn't headlights. I imagined the notebook filling itself, imagined my rule writing me. I turned the cruiser around and blocked the intersection. I called for every unit. I stood in the road and waited. The light dimmed. The calls tapered off, one by one, until dispatch fell silent and then returned, breathless and relieved. The family was home, unharmed. A wrong address, they said. I didn't argue. When I got back to the station, the notebook was open on my desk. A new page waited, blank and patient. I picked up a pen and wrote slowly, choosing each word like it might bite. I wrote my rule, and the air shifted, satisfied. The chief nodded once, eyes wet, and went into his office. I drive the same roads now, count the same mailboxes. The town behaves. Mostly. I don't think about leaving anymore. I think about balance, about maintenance. I think about how rules aren't cages, but agreements. At night, when the radio hums and the fields breathe, I listen, and the town listens back, which should have scared me more than it did. Dawn slid in pale and tentative, and the town looked almost gentle. I finished my report, signed my name where it fit too well, and stepped outside. The air smelled like cut grass and something older, mineral and damp. I realized I hadn't checked my phone in days. No missed calls, no messages. It was as if the town had politely intercepted everything and decided I didn't need it anymore. I trained my partner the way the chief trained me. Careful with language, generous with pauses. I never called them rules out loud. I framed them as habits, best practices, local quirks. He listened, eager to belong, and that eagerness worried me. Belonging here had a cost structure that shifted without notice. Still, he learned. He didn't drive Old Mill Road. He ignored the woods when they spoke. He closed his eyes and counted when the world stood up wrong. The notebook stopped circling his name. The chief retired on a Tuesday. He shook my hand and thanked me for staying. I watched him drive away in daylight once and felt something in the town loosen and then tighten again, like a knot testing a new configuration. His office became mine by default. The blank space on the wall where his calendar hung stayed blank. Some absences are structural. I filled in the 10th rule over time, not all at once. It wasn't a sentence so much as an understanding that rewrote itself. It said the town would keep what it needed and return what it could. It said I was both keeper and kept. It said survival here wasn't victory, just continuation. When I finished, the notebook closed itself and didn't open again unless I asked. Now, when the radio goes silent, I drive. When a child cries or laughs where no child should be, I wait. When headlights circle, I watch from a distance. The town behaves because I do. That's the agreement. Maintenance over heroics. Balance over truth. Sometimes, at the edge of sleep, I think about leaving. The road signs don't move anymore. They don't have to. I know where everything is. I know where it isn't. The town hums, satisfied, and I hum with it, a note added to an old chord. If you come through rural Ohio and think about stopping, you probably won't notice anything wrong. That's the point. If you do stop, read what you're given. Follow it exactly. And if there's a blank at the end, don't rush to fill it. Some rules are written by staying. The weeks after Silent Creek's collapse were strange. I returned to Columbus, trying to slip back into a semblance of normal life. Coffee shops, the hum of traffic, people chattering over cell phones. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Every time I caught a shadow out of the corner of my eye, I felt the faintest tug, like a whisper from another world brushing against the edges of reality. The memory of the door, the warden, the breach, it lingered, not like a dream, not like something I could dismiss. It was permanent, like a scar carved into the fabric of my perception. At night, I couldn't sleep without checking the windows. Every mirror, every reflective surface. Even in darkness, I could feel traces of the wrongness, faint echoes of the forest, the doors, the children frozen in amber. It wasn't terror, not exactly. It was anticipation, like something I had glimpsed long ago and would encounter again. My hands were back to normal, yet when I flexed them, I could feel the memory of their elongation, the subtle shift in bone and sinew that had once marked me as a rule keeper. I was changed in ways no one could see, in ways I might never fully understand. One evening, as rain-slicked streets glimmered under neon lights, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box, dark and unvarnished, with intricate carvings that twisted under my gaze, almost breathing. I recognized the craftsmanship immediately. Just like the frame of the impossible door in Blackwood Forest. My pulse quickened. Inside the box was a folded piece of leather, worn smooth with age, like the notebook I'd found in Silent Creek. The notebook had been gone with the town, buried in memory and broken seals. Yet here it was. I unfolded the leather carefully, almost afraid to touch it. Written inside were more rules. No numbers, no margins, just lines of elegant, looping handwriting that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Do not ignore the signs that follow you. They know you have seen. They wait. Another line, smaller, almost hidden between the folds. The boundary is patient. It does not forgive. It remembers. My stomach sank. This wasn't from Silent Creek, or maybe it was. The handwriting bore the same nuances I remembered from Harlan Holloway's notes. The deputies who came before me. But who had sent it? Why now? The room seemed to breathe, the shadows thickening as if responding to the presence of the notebook. I set it on the table, staring at it for hours, feeling the air grow colder. And then I heard it. A faint tapping, like knuckles on wood, echoing through the empty apartment. Not from the street, not from any neighbor. The sound came from the box. My finger shook as I reached for it. The lid rattled slightly in my hand as though something inside wanted out. I forced it open, but it was empty. Just the leather. Then I heard the voice, not spoken, not in words, but in the hollow resonance behind my mind. The rules continue. You are not finished. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. The voice carried the weight of the warden, though I knew it was not truly the warden. It was the boundary itself, reaching across space and memory, reminding me that some things never truly end. The light from the street lamps flickered in time with my pulse, and I realized that for the first time since leaving Silent Creek, I had become hyper-aware of every subtle imperfection in reality. The bend of a shadow, the wrong angle of a door, the flicker of a reflection where none should exist. I grabbed my coat and left the apartment, walking the rain-soaked streets. Every alley, every doorway seemed alive, as if the city itself had taken on a new consciousness, influenced by the breach I'd once sealed. People passed by, oblivious, laughing, talking, scrolling through phones. They didn't notice the faint shimmer that clung to the edges of reality, the invisible distortion that hummed just beyond perception. But I did. I could see it. The memory of Silent Creek had planted the seed, and now the world around me had become subtly thinner. Hours passed. I wandered through the streets until I found myself at the riverbank, staring at the dark water. The reflection of the city rippled unnaturally, a subtle distortion that made the lights bend like liquid. My reflection wasn't quite right. My eyes seemed older, the shadow of my former self stretching too far back, too long, like echoes of the transformation. I felt the pull again, a tug from something waiting beyond perception. The voice whispered in the back of my mind, "The boundary is never finished, never truly ends." I realized then what it meant to be changed. Silent Creek had been a pocket, a singular focal point, and I had closed it. But the force behind it, the entity, the fault, the thin places, was everywhere. There were cracks, small at first, imperceptible, in cities and towns, in forests and abandoned mines. And somewhere, someone else would see them as I had, feel them, and be called to act. Some would heed the rules, others would fail, and the cycle would begin again. I returned to my apartment before dawn, soaked, shaking, the wooden box clutched tightly to my chest. I placed it on the kitchen table and opened the notebook again. The leather felt warmer this time, almost alive, and as I traced the words, a new line appeared. Ink that had not been there before. The keeper watches, the warden sleeps, but the world remembers the breach. I shivered. The knowledge was intoxicating and terrifying. Even as I tried to ignore it, even as I tried to return to normalcy, I knew I would never be free of the weight of what I'd seen. Days later, I began noticing subtle intrusions into my life. Objects out of place, doors I hadn't opened before appearing ajar, reflections in mirrors that didn't match my movements. Sometimes I caught glimpses of figures just beyond vision, standing, watching, and always, in the back of my mind, the faint, persistent echo. The rules are patient. They wait. I understood now. The responsibility of a rule keeper never truly ends. It doesn't matter if the town is gone, if the breach is closed. Something in the spaces between worlds remembers, and it calls across time and distance for someone to act. I knew, finally, that I had been changed forever. Not just in body, but in perception, in awareness, in responsibility. And though I walked in the ordinary world, coffee shops, streets, fluorescent lit offices, a part of me remained tethered to the thin places, forever alert to wrongness, forever ready to enforce the invisible rules that keep reality from unraveling. Somewhere beyond the edge of vision, the faint shimmer waits, and I will see it when it